Hello there, good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening on Rwanda Television News on yet another episode of 360 Degrees. My name, as always, is Sam Kalisa, and this evening we are going to be talking about space technology. In a few, space technology is just the use of outer space in travel or other activities beyond the Earth's atmosphere for purposes such as space flight, space exploration, and Earth observation. It is in the development world, space technology has been cited to have a great role in accelerating sustainable development. It presents applications of space science and technology for achieving sustainable development goals, including ensuring food safety, reducing the risk of disasters, and preventing humanitarian crisis, among different other roles or other importances that come with the use of space technology. In 2020, Rwanda established the Rwanda Space Agency with a mission of developing Rwanda's space sector towards socio-economic development. Of course, this means that Rwanda wasn't or isn't left behind in this particular matter of space technology. And in this episode of 360 Degrees, we will examine the role of space technology in socio-economic development, looking at the contribution to Rwanda's development agenda. I'm not alone this evening, as joining me is Joseph Abakunda, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for the Rwanda Space Agency. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, also joining us, the agency, if I can say that, is among the first that got to use the space data provided by the Rwanda Space Agency. Joining me is Musana Bernard, who is the Head of Knowledge and Forecasting at the Rwanda Water Resources Board. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. I started by saying that space technology brings about different importances in a country's development, and in the modern world, it is used in different other sectors, including agriculture and different other sectors, actually, by providing the data needed to actually take particular decisions to develop different sectors. To start off, Joseph, maybe if you can help us with the analysis of in regards to Rwanda's space sector and its development and the space technology in general. Where do we stand as of today?
For a 2-year-old, I would say we're doing relatively well. As you mentioned, the Rwanda Space Agency was set up about 2 years ago, and this is in the midst of a pandemic. So I think that is testament to the value that space technology is given by the government.
All right.
We, I think, focused on the low-hanging fruits, or the how do we support ongoing efforts, ongoing initiatives by the government of Rwanda. And so we're very much heavily invested in helping institutions to achieve Vision 2050.
All right.
Today, I believe we will be, touching a bit of the kind of work we do with the Rwanda Water Board. But that is one of many other institutions that we're working with.
All right.
That is primarily locally and supporting socioeconomic development. Further afield, there's been a very, very heavy push for what we call space diplomacy. Very recently, we signed to the Artemis Accords, which is a partnership that is led by NASA. But we also, the CEO of the Rwanda Space Agency was in Paris last September, also getting us to be a member of the International Astronautical Federation. So there's been various plays, whether it is in space diplomacy, in supporting socioeconomic development. But one example actually that has been very exciting for us is, if you remember, when I don't know if you followed the news when Apple, the iPhone 14 came out with this new feature of satellite-enabled emergency services. That was because we had a ground station in Nyagatare, which Rwanda was able to help facilitate. So there's been quite an amount of work that I think the government has been heavily involved in.
All right.
And it excites us to see partners such as the Rwanda Water Board, taking up some of these services.
All right. Before we maybe go to the partners and how they're developing, profiting from these particular services already in place, how do you work with those particular partners in bringing about the desired changes?
So we deal with partners on a case-by-case basis, but as a rule of thumb, most partners locally, the stakeholders, in this case the Rwanda Water Board, it's very demand-driven. We sit with them, kind of go through an exercise where we understand their pain points, and they're the subject matter experts, whether it's in agriculture, in mining, in infrastructure, in this case with water, and we try and show them how space can actually support or bring efficiencies or help them reduce costs and that kind of thing. So I hope we can actually get into some of the impressions that these stakeholders are actually taking with this.
Absolutely. To you, Musana Bernard, regarding the use of space data or space technology in actually ensuring the work of the Rwanda Space Board, where do you stand as of today as the institution?
So, Rwanda Water Resources Board has a broad mandate, and it looks not only at the current challenges we have, but mainly on the future challenges we have. And we have, as you said, a lot of pain points. One of our pain points is erosion. Erosion takes 2-3% of our GDP, and this is even underestimated. It kills the investment we have. It destroys irrigation schemes. It creates problems to hydropower. It creates problems to water supply. And it can't ensure us our mandates to be delivered, which is sufficient water and quality water to all Rwandans.
All right.
So 10 years ago, I'll take you a story probably to make this area this field is a bit techy. So probably a story will be tell better the narrative we have working with the Rwanda Space. 15 years ago, when people want to do an assessment of erosion control in the country, they were gathering multi-stakeholders together, drive different parts of the country, assess without proper tools and just visually. Even if they are very good technicians, they couldn't do a good work.
Right.
They were spending a lot of resources and not even being able to give an analytical work that will ease the investment assessment and the implementation afterward.
Right.
So, and this was done 15 years ago. We already have satellites in the space, and we couldn't benefit because we didn't have the right agencies, the right logistics, the right procurement in place to access space data and technology. And this is where we are really benefiting now. And we are using a lot of data and leveraging from also the analytical capacity that goes with the establishment of Rwanda Space Agency. They have campuses, they're in place of putting infrastructure for analytics that we couldn't have in the country.
All right. Yeah. Maybe before we go to break it down on how data is specifically used to actually make sure that we have access to water, be it in quantity and also in quality, as you said, clean water. Back to you, Joseph. You mentioned about Rwanda joining the Artemis regarding, of course, space diplomacy. Maybe if you can tell us more about it. Why did Rwanda decide to join, and of what use will it be to Rwanda's space sector?
Great. So the Artemis Accords, this is more of a grouping. It's a meeting of the minds. Before the Artemis Accords, the only policy or regulatory kind of best practices that were put together were in the 60s. And that's what we call the United Nations Outer Space Treaty.
Right.
The Outer Space Treaty, most people in the new space economy consider it a bit outdated, just because then it mainly was considering two big space powers, right? The Soviet Union and the US. and the Artemis Accords are kind of saying our next frontier is going back to the moon. We need to take as many more people, as many more nations with us. And so Rwanda was actually the first African nation to say, we believe this is a vision worth subscribing to. And this is obviously a political decision made at the highest levels of government. Foreign Affairs, consulted throughout the entire process. But maybe to come to the potential benefits from such signing, space diplomacy is another tool that helps us achieve some of the work we're supporting other stakeholders like the Rwanda Water Board and other stakeholders.
Right.
And the reason is it opens up a grouping. It opens you up to different partners who already, let's say, have used satellite technology for 15 years, like Bernard was talking about, in leveraging, let's say, soil erosion, like he was talking about. So it's not just about going to the moon, it's also partnering with other countries, even in other areas that still leverage space technology. That's one. Two is, this is also a potential boost to the economy. Because everything that is going to the moon or to space was built on Earth. And signing up to such principles of saying we're going to exploit the moon in a peaceful and responsible manner does open us up to an opportunity where, if in a few years we have a company here that it might be a subsidiary, it might be headquartered here, but it could actually be looking to, let's say, mine some regolith on the moon, or it might be willing to build some CubeSats that are being taken to the moon, or partner with some of these. These are the areas that we're looking to. Of course, is it moonshot thinking? Yes, but it's nothing outside what Rwanda is used to being, thinking outside the box, dreaming big and thinking farther ahead.
All right. Absolutely. And back to you, Bernard, maybe if you are to break it down, you mentioned one of the important matters that actually being tackled by using space technology, which is a soil erosion. Maybe in terms of the mandates of the Rwanda Water Board, if you are to narrow it down to not only soil erosion, what other things do you use space data for?
So, just I gave another example. We also say quantity of water, and we know we are a country where most of our water comes from our rain, not from neighboring countries. So, and we need to store water, and most of the water just run out of the country without us benefiting from it. But we also have natural storage. Our natural storage are lakes, our groundwater. Groundwater is huge. It can store 2 to 5 years of our rain, stored underneath. So, but most of the time you don't know where is the groundwater because it's hidden. And space data. I won't mention all the type of data, gravity data. Lineament, what we call lineament, this means features the human eye cannot see, but because you do heavy analytics on images, looking at where the vegetation is changing, you can discover area where we can have sufficient water to supply not only domestic, but also do small-scale irrigation up to hundreds, just based on groundwater.
All right.
It's something we are heavily working on, and the initial data we are getting are very promising.
All right. Absolutely. Back to you, Joseph. You said it 2 years down the road, and as I started introducing, in 2020, Rwanda introducing the Rwanda Space Agency with the mission of developing Rwanda's space sector towards socio-economic development. Maybe if you can break it down for maybe someone who is watching us right now and does not know specifically the mandate of the Rwanda Space Agency, what would you say it is?
So we break down our mandate into four main parts. There's the regulatory piece, which is kind of looking at what space activity is going on, what frameworks need to be put in place, what policies would make us competitive. And so there's the regulatory piece, and on that front, we work very heavily with policymakers and other regulators to make sure we're competitive. And we've had considerable success. I think it's worth mentioning that in just over a year ago, we had a filing at the ITU that made some noise for all the good reasons of over 350,000 satellites. To put that into context, Elon Musk could not get 40,000 from the FCC. So the regulatory piece is really alive and competitive on the global scale.
All right.
There is also a lot of scientific research that is being done. And we fall in love with the problem. In this case, we're not water experts, but what he was just what Bernard was just sharing with you right now, if the Rwanda Water Board was to invest in a software platform for program monitoring, evaluation, or mapping out all these applications, we're talking north of $1 billion francs per year, right? And that is money that they save just by. Does that make us the experts? Not at all. But the more we get closer to the stakeholders who are using these services, there is, we push the boundaries of research, and we also save government and Rwandans money. There is the advisory piece. We are the primary advisor to government for anything space. And then there is also building cooperation, so space diplomacy that we just touched upon, and we have actually seen considerable success, not just within Rwanda, but even with a couple of other countries on the African continent reaching out to us and trying to know our journey and trying to ask how they can replicate something similar. On the scientific research part, there is something you asked about, how do you help the average citizen know? The example I think Bernard just talked about, soil erosion and water quality. I think if you remember, we did work on a water quality project for them. And here we're trying to measure turbidity. The turbidity, basically, we're trying to see how dense is the water, what sort of particles are in.
All right.
He didn't want to get into the technical details, but we're basically seeing the reflection of light. If light is reflected really, really deep into water versus if it's just on the surface, that has a different density.
All right.
And so from space, you can actually do some of this modeling, which we're very happy to say we've managed to achieve, but definitely not something that would be achieved without the buy-in or the collaboration of our partners. Yeah.
Absolutely. I started by mentioning that space science or space technology is generally helping in achieving the sustainable goals, including ensuring food safety, reducing the risks of disasters, preventing humanitarian crisis, monitoring natural resources, reducing poverty, as well as telecommunications and health in general. Maybe I'll ask this question to both of you. I'll start with Bernard. Maybe if you are to put it in a local context, I would say how is Rwanda leveraging on space technology to address all these particular issues, as we, the country, have been in the past years facing issues of climate change, disasters, heavy rains, killing people and destroying property and all that, plus other issues in the agriculture sector that ends up reducing the productivity due to the unforeseen climate change circumstances that cause all these problems thereafter. What can you say is Rwanda really investing in, and how to see that space technology is actually playing a part in reducing all these particular matters and achieving these sustainable development goals?
We talked about turbidity. This is related also to the SDG 6. I'm going now to maybe talk a bit generally onto the climate change question. And generally, if you look at our policy and commitments to the Paris Agreement, we can divide them to two. We have the adaptation and the mitigation.
All right.
How are we doing? How are we working toward reducing possible harmful effect to the global climate, and how are we adapting, because we are going to be suffering from the consequences of the global warming. So on the mitigation, let's start by maybe the easiest one. The mitigation, we know that we need to have more green ways of managing our land, more trees, not only in the forest, but also in the farmland, in the public space. And currently, Rwanda Space has different agreements with scientists all over the world that now are deploying a technology, and probably will be one of the first country in the world, maybe the first country in the world, of mapping individual trees, all the trees in the country mapped in a regular basis. So you could do an accounting of our trees we have, and also not only the trees, but also the carbon we are sequestering in those trees. And we can go even, because carbon sequestration is also beyond the trees. So I'll not dive into that too much. But we have also climate finance. How do we attract the finance so that people work on that? And one of the reasons, if you don't have a good way of accounting, it's hard to convince people to give you money for sequestering carbon. So Rwanda Space is putting us in the position of really being a very convincing partner in the carbon market and finance. That's one of, I'm just picking one. And if you go to the adaptation, we talked about erosion, we're talking about flood. And if you look at the example of Sebeya, where we managed to reduce significantly the risk of flood in that area, one of the reasons we did not do a lot of topography, heavy topography. We leverage on LiDAR survey based on drone. And those drone companies are somehow regulated and partnering the Rwanda Space. So the space industry is not just the Rwanda Space. They are the regulator for the other players around that.
All right. Maybe if you add on it.
I think he's really mentioned a lot of anything climate that we're doing. The experts here really have been the Ministry of Environment, Fonergwa, the Green Fund, and what I thought was very interesting is last October, there were not, during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, there were not many delegations that brought on board their space agencies, even those that had space agencies. Rwanda was different. Rwanda included within the delegation to COP27, space technology. And even if this was a first, we did see considerable interest right after that. Bernard has just talked about the mapping of forests. There's actually a Rwandan PhD student in Denmark who, is probably within a few years going to be one of the experts in this field. But mapping individual trees from space is it's the next frontier. And Bernard touched on climate financing, but even if we're developing partnerships with other funding institutions on that front, there might be, on the mitigation, there is the NDC framework, right? There's the, I think ours is 38%, the goal that by 2030 we need to have at least 38% reduction of emissions. And how do you measure that? And so that's where we try to bring in these analytics to propose novel ways of doing it. Do we answer everything 100%? Probably not. But we probably will at least do, relatively good amount of work to at least get the job done.
Absolutely.
The second part to that is the recent landmark agreement, the loss and damage, which was agreed upon in Egypt. Countries will need to now decide how do we actually show the loss that we have had or the damage that has been done to our forests. And space technology helps you to go back in time. You can actually say for the last 10 years, this is how much of our forest cover has actually been depleted. Or in the event, you can actually paint a model and say, in the event that we actually lost 30% of our forest cover, this is the corresponding growth that we're actually giving up.
All right.
So the opportunity cost is really where now, you know, kind of sets up your negotiation or your bargaining power in a way. So it's an area we're actively working with, you know, the different environment ministries. But I'm glad to know, you know, the good thing about environment is it's all interconnected. You're talking about water, and all of a sudden it's a climate issue. You're talking about landslides, and all of a sudden disaster and water all made together. So it's an exciting time to lend our support.
All right. And maybe to go into details, it actually just clocked my mind right now. One of the issues that are being addressed through the Rwanda Water Board is the quality of water, the quantity and access, but also the quality. It reminded me of His Excellency President Kagame back in the days, talking about one of the issues of our water being not clean, mentioning an example of River Nyabarongo. How are we trying to make sure that, you know, we do everything necessary that as we strive to have a clean water access, we also have this same quality that we are always looking for?
There's no doubt that Nyabarongo is a problem, because if you look, you ask all actors along the way, people who are abstracting water for, I'm not just talking of the color. There's a long discussion about whether our cappuccino rivers will turn into, I don't know, mineral water or something different. But there's an academic discussion. Some people say the color can stay longer, but there's no doubt that there's a heavy load of sediment in the river, and that's no doubt about it. And this is a problem for us, and definitely. That's why I was saying that the pain point, erosion is probably the most important or critical environmental problem our generation need to deal with. And we should be aiming at saying we solve that problem.
All right.
Yeah, and as I said, where should we start from? And the space technology gave us a beginning of an answer. You have the models, you have the place where you don't have enough adequate measures, and then you can start by that point. So that all the heavy investments are allocated wisely, and you start having impact.
Does it mean that we now know where to start solving this particular issue?
Absolutely. We have what we call the National Program for Soil Erosion Control, NAPROSEC, which is a joint exercise with the Minister of Local Government, Minister of Environment, the Minister of Agriculture, all agencies, including mining, toward trying to get all the resources, starting by community. In fact, this is tackling mainly community engagement. But the data we have, and one of the tools we are using are developed by the Rwanda Space. It's an app we are going to deploy with the CEDOs and at the cell level, when they record whatever they are doing. And we track it against our what we call the Chrome DSS, which is the kind of tools where we map where we have more problem.
All right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. To again narrow it, Joseph, how do we see the collected data reflecting activities in various economic sectors of the country?
I'm not an economist, but I think one thing that is clear is there is data drives decisions, and it drives good decision making. So to the policymaker who wants to make decisions, the more data he has, but data that informs, that is easy to chew to, and that's where we're really putting our energy. The good thing about the Rwanda Space Agency, really not our work, but more of how the government of Rwanda is really working, is it makes it so easy to, one, have government ministries work together.
All right.
And so the data sharing issues that you find in other countries are not necessarily here. So I think that gives you a very, very good indicator on the level of trust that government institutions, but obviously a layer beneath, citizens also have with knowing government can manage this data or can freely give it. Where Rwanda Space Agency comes in is we've developed what's called a GeoHub. It's a national geospatial data portal. So every data set within the government of Rwanda that can be geolocated is under one roof. And so it makes it easy if Bernard is talking about a hydrological zone, right? And he wants to know how does this particular hydrological zone tie into the economic development of this area. We can actually highlight insights and say, by the way, the reason this hydrological zone is working or has higher economic activity than the one next door is because this is a border town.
All right.
So more trade is actually driving this. That's one front, which I guess could be a good thing. The other thing which it helps is it also helps the water board set in place policies which might say if this continues, the human activity here will actually cause, let's say, more soil erosion, or you will have Nyabarongo will be, dark cappuccino versus, the mineral water that he actually wants. So data, I think, the more data we have, and Rwanda Space Agency helping to use satellite data as a base, having ground truthing and other in situ data is something we've actually seen to be very useful to the stakeholders when making policies.
All right. By the way, talking about that, I realized you highlighted something about it, all the data needed being under one roof. Despite working with the Rwanda Water Board, there are different other institutions in different sectors that actually need the data provided by the Rwanda Space Agency. We can talk about mining, we can talk about agriculture and different others. How do you make sure that there is, if I can say, interconnectivity of these various institutions and in different sectors that need the data from the Rwanda Space Agency to drive their decisions?
I think that's fairly straightforward because we have a very straightforward process. We don't turn back anyone who is government, who wants certain answers or to make certain decisions and needs our data. So working within government is just it's a very low-hanging fruit, but it's also demand-driven. So however much we can do the advocacy and try to highlight to different stakeholders of how space can actually support their mission, it really comes down to them needing this. And so, but what we've noticed in our experience is when an institution, for example, the Rwanda Water Board, is interested in a particular decision, will bend over backwards, go 150% to make sure we support them.
All right.
For someone who is not government, we're still working on, for example, helping the private sector leverage some of this technology. At 2 years old, I don't think we're 100% where we want to be. But it's something that I want to say we've already gotten considerable support from all the different institutions, and we think we'll get there. Academically, we've built partnerships with the Carnegie Mellon University, Africa Institute of Mathematical Sciences, UR, and so developing research projects is really very, very easy in sharing some of this data.
All right. Back to you, Bernard. Despite the space sector, I mean, it hasn't been so long since it was given a lot of attention and investment by the country. But what can you say are the advantages that the development of space technology brings to a country like Rwanda?
We have not done the economics of space into understanding the costs and benefits. It's quite a huge endeavor, and being at the beginning, it's got to be something we will be hard to do. But it's obvious that if we, I'm taking a project. We have a project in solving the problem of erosion and flood in the volcano area and what we call the Vunga corridor. If we have to do catchment by catchment, deploying land assessments, definitely we can reduce the costs by up to less than 20-30% of this is a benefit. Again, we also be very accurate on what we are doing, which it's very important because you don't just look at the financial, but also you have to look at the economic benefits. Right. Are you doing the service you should do to the community? And both for accountability, for efficiency, for accuracy, the space technology is really something very, very helpful. It gives us confidence on what we are doing, and we are focusing on delivering our services. And it makes the government also more and more playing its initial role, I think, which is helping others to being an enabler more than an actor, because there we can plan, we can mobilize resources, we can ask people to deliver, we can engage the private sector, and we can still keep track of what they're doing and with a very high accuracy.
Absolutely. Maybe he answered my next question in one way or another, but I'll still ask it to you, Joseph. Who benefits from the existence of the Rwanda Space Agency?
I think it would be very difficult if you ask me who does not benefit. The reason I say that, when Bernard was talking about the terraces, one of the products that I think we developed for them is a terrace suitability map. And in this case, and there's a lot of literature that has gone into this, but basically the recommended terraces are, if a mountain is beyond 47%, ideally not more than 12% of slope, that's kind of the sweet spot for where to build terraces.
All right.
But we're in a hilly country, so sometimes you actually save someone like the water board from, because they're not going to measure, or if they did, it's just going to take a lot of time. So trying to help them over a map and narrow down the areas that they're supposed to build their terraces, that's actually turned out to be something useful to them. The second part is actually monitoring. So there is knowing this is all the areas that are at high risk for erosion, and they have indices from low risk all the way to high risk. But there are times where knowing is not enough, because they also sometimes, all right, this is very high risk, but what if it's high risk and was already had interventions 5 years ago where there are already terraces? That doesn't tell the full story. So helping them know this is high risk, but actually there is no intervention for the last 5 years. That is analytics that we've managed to do in-house. So to the average citizen, I think anytime they see government supplying and achieving their socio-economic development goals, they don't need to know how they got there. The Space Agency is really going to make sure they try to improve efficiencies in the back end by supporting other government institutions fulfill their mandate.
Absolutely. Maybe I'll go ahead to ask this other question to you. Regarding the issue of investment, I know very well that the government of Rwanda has really invested a lot in terms of developing Rwanda's space sector. But if you are to talk about the issue of investment, is there more areas that needs to be, that still need investment in order to keep track and grow further Rwanda's space sector? And maybe to add on, how can we, let me say, attract the private sector to play their role in this?
Okay, so the question is twofold. One is, for a country such as ours, there will always be more demand for what we need to do. But I think it's also, if you put that into context, for the amount of work that you've managed to achieve within 2 years, I think that's not possible without significant investment. And investment is not just money. Investment is political capital, political will and advocacy. Investment is the entire ecosystem you're working with, people like the Water Resources Board who actually have that hunger and to adopt. That's investment from another stakeholder. But I think what you're trying to allude to from a private sector angle, the financial investment, even if that's not the only area we look at in terms of investment, is something that we have chosen the approach to incubate from the ground up so that it can be organic over time. So however much we're hungry for growth in that area, we're in no rush because we don't want to make mistakes. We kind of want to, crawl, walk, then run.
All right.
And that's the approach that we've chosen. The reason we've chosen that approach is because in such a very specialized, highly skilled sector, shortcuts are very costly.
All right.
And so trying, as we develop the private sector, working with academia to build that knowledge, skills gap like we're doing with the Carnegie Mellon University, we're actually trying to help Carnegie Mellon set up a a course that is very specific to the kind of work we're doing. So we're now handing the baton over to students, but we want to make sure it's at the quality as if we should have done it before. So in a nutshell, I want to say the biggest investment, at least in the short term, is probably going to be very heavily on developing capacity.
All right.
in the Rwandan engineers themselves. But on top of that, there is also investment in what can attract foreign companies. So we have we have an upcoming teleport, which is a bunch of ground station antennas in a place called Murire in Kwamagana. That is actually going to be having one of the biggest antennas in the region, because it's going to be supporting communications to the moon by NASA and Blue Origin, which is a company owned by Jeff Bezos. So there are investments we're doing to attract foreign companies to have more work. There are also investments we're doing locally to help Rwandan engineers kind of be competitive on the global scale.
Absolutely. Maybe as we move forward and heading towards the conclusion, way forward, Bernard, looking at what we have so far achieved, which I can proudly say is tremendous in these 2 years since the Rwanda Space Agency was established to actually provide all this data that is actually used in decision making in different sectors. Way forward, what does this signal to the way that the country, the economy, the sector in general is going to be maybe in the next years, maybe if we can say 5 or 10?
I think we should work into two, maybe a simplifying area. One is to still achieving even more accurate, informative analytics and through data analysis, big data, data science. And the other one is to make sure people consume those data. Absolutely. There's no point of telling people where the groundwater is and still when the dry season hits us or we have a drought spell and people are still suffering while we have water. We should make sure that we use this data, we engage all the partners, we really actively, this is our part, this is once the Rwanda Space has given us, then we translate all information in something more actionable, more convincing, more compelling to, I'm just talking of, I'm very fan of Street View that is joining us. You are visualizing your flood in 3D and being sure that when if the event is coming, when you step out, you are going to be in the water, just in front of your house. Right. That tells you something, and that you have to take a decision and do something.
Absolutely. Joseph, way forward.
I think by if the last 2 years are anything to go by, we're just going to get more busier and work a bit harder. We're very interested in expanding the relationships. I mean, our CEO had a very busy year last year, first in Paris with the International Astronautical Federation, then he went to DC for the Artemis Accords. Before that, in the summer, the ITU was here. Basically, he was kind of, the champion of how space can actually be regulated from a telecom perspective through the Global Satellite Operators Association. I believe that business is probably going to continue because space, by its nature, is just not something that is done by any one player. So I see really space diplomacy maintaining that momentum. In terms of downstream applications and the adoption of these services, I know today we're talking about the work with the Water Resources Board, but there are other partners, and hopefully you can get to talk to them as well at some point, especially leading up to COP28, where we're going to see a lot more adoption of space technology services within the already existing mandate, just because it drives efficiencies, it lowers costs, it just makes decision making easier. One of the things that we've noticed in advocacy is sometimes, for example, Bernard was talking about mitigation. Mitigation sometimes, an adaptation could come in the form of building trees. Other times it could come in form of a policy paper that informs a policymaker to say, maybe we need to just reduce the human activity in this area. And all those are still going to support your climate objectives. So we see, I believe that the trajectory of adoption for these services is also going to increase.
All right.
Another trend, I would say the last one, which is the attraction of space companies from abroad. I mean, we have quite a number of US companies, that are coming to either file here or set up a subsidiary here. I see that trend, I think, increasing, not just from the West, but in Europe, there's also been considerable interest, but also on the African continent because they're growing. So I think those are the main three trends I see going forward, and yeah, it's a good time to be alive.
If you'd allow me, take you back a little bit on space diplomacy. Out of curiosity, how do you see the willingness of different players from different countries and international space agencies when it comes to partnering and bringing their hands together towards a common goal? Can you really say there is enough willingness to actually give a hand to each other to make sure that we are collectively growing this sector?
Yeah, I guess I can't speak for the partners further afield amongst themselves, but what I can say is obviously geopolitics always plays its hand, but numbers don't lie, and people love partners who actually deliver results. And I think that's each time it's a time and tested jurisdiction that whenever they come to Rwanda, we deliver. Not the Rwanda Space Agency, GOR in general, and so we kind of are benefiting off of that. So I think that however much there's a place for geopolitics, I think you will still see partners, because space is not a forgiving environment. You send up a satellite once, if there's any mistakes or shortcuts, millions of dollars just went down the drain. So people love partners who deliver. And I think that's our niche. That's our area of expertise, or I guess of assurance.
All right. Maybe as we head towards the conclusion, Bernard, you mentioned something very, very, very important and critical, if I can say. And when it comes to using the data provided by the Rwanda Space Agency in actually driving to effective solutions and decisions in general by different players and actually beneficiaries from the data provided by the agency, I think this is something that different sectors that need to benefit from the data needs to give a lot of attention. Maybe if you can say more from the 2 years that we've had the Rwanda Space Agency providing data to us, and if you can maybe judge from the perspective of the Rwanda Water Board and different other players that benefit from the data provided, how do we stand as of today, and what do you think really needs to be done right to see more improvement in actually benefiting from the data provided to see tangible solutions on the ground?
As a new good, I would say we need to organize this value chain. Who produced the data, who produced the information, who is the broker in the middle, who is the middleman, who is the end user. And all those people have a role both to inform the analytics backward, what we call the co-production of some of the services they are giving to us.
All right.
But we also need definitely to a kind of education to make sure they really leverage and do good business, be resilient, as this is our mandate in the government. Thank you.
Absolutely. Maybe as we conclude, I'll just give each of you maybe 1 minute if you do have any other departing words on this particular matter as we conclude. Maybe starting with you, Joseph.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having us. It's really, and we really appreciate the time to kind of communicate our story and what we do. But I think really thanks overall to the different government stakeholders who are willing to work with some of the data that we do and share with us their expertise of validating the data. So yeah, I think we're very, very happy for what we've achieved. Definitely not resting on our laurels. We're really looking forward to doing a lot more, but definitely very happy for the support given so far.
Absolutely.
I would say there's money in the space data, and I hope we will have people who translate the information into business.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Joseph Abakunda, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for the Rwanda Space Agency, for your time tonight on Rwanda Television.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Musana Bernard, the Head of Knowledge and Forecasting at the Rwanda Water Resources Board, for your time on RTV tonight.
Thank you.
All right. And this brings us to the end of this edition of 360 Degrees. On behalf of the entire production as well as the technical team that made it happen, thank you for being with us. Up until next time, stay safe and have a good evening.